Okay, hello, and welcome to part two of my deep dive slash general tips around how to examine a nation video, looking at Moria here, and we are at pretender design. So just to recap, in case you didn't see the last video, maybe you just want to see the pretender design. Um, the looking at Moria here, we've got a very powerful nation. It's certainly a to some people put it an S tier nation in the early age, with some distinct strengths and weaknesses that we talked about in the last video. But we've got strong, durable infantry that struggle with killing things. We have, interestingly enough, two different ways of being survivable, with glamour on our Numidians and lots of hit points on our Fomorians. So they complement each other nicely because they are weak to different things, and your enemy might be able to counter one but not the other. We've got a mediocre couple of sacred units here. Not likely to be worth a bless, but you could definitely do so. And in fact, the first example I'm going to give you does actually focus on a bless for them, because that's a interesting starting point. Lets me look at a couple other synergies. And then up here with our commanders, we can see the magic. We've got big air magic and a little bit of death in our Fomorian kings. They can get up to air 4 and death 3, I believe. Yeah, so big air, big death on them. We've got big modest air and big death on our Numidian sorceresses, and big glamour as well, regularly getting up to glamour 3. We've got a okay sacred commander who is stealthy, which maybe have some use for if you wanted to do some raiding. We have a very capable battle mage with the Fomorian druid with air 2, which allows us to cast lightning bolt and eventually thunder strikes. We've got a strong researcher with the Firbolg druid, who gives us some path diversity as well, with an additional source of a little bit of nature, an additional source of water, and a little bit of earth. So that's a good unit. We have our unmarked champions, who are a good sacred commander, able to use formations and things like that. And then we have a couple of troop fairies and some scouts. So that's the real quick overview of the nation. Again, if you want to dive into it deeper, I'll link the last video. And before I get into the pretender design as well, I also wanted to give a shout out to another channel. Just give me a moment here. Let me find it. Named Top Guides. I will link it in the description, where he goes into a fair bit of detail on the different pretender chassis types. And so what I mean by that is all of these guys, the sort of the build types, how you might build them out, and what each of the different chassis types in and of themselves are good for. So I'll link his description, his video in the bottom, and I would highly recommend checking it out. I think he does quite a good job and gives a good overview. But anyhow, what I wanted to focus on is a couple of specific builds that I think work well with Moria. Now, when designing a god, the things you have to consider are your scales. And I'll just pick somebody random here. You have to consider your scales. You have to consider your magic. And then you also have to consider your bless. And you've got a limited number of design points to do that with. And different gods are going to have different path access and things like that. So this guy has air, fire, and water, which you can then boost up. So going from air 1 to air 2 costs 8 points. Air 2 to A3 costs more. I can't remember exactly how it goes up. It's in the manual. But buying a new path, however, costs 60 points. So I go from 190 down to 130 there. So making sure that you have gods who have paths that you want is quite often important. unless you, or the chassis starts with paths that you want are quite important, unless you go for one of these guys down here who can pick up new paths very inexpensively. Uh, the Dominion 2 guys tend to be awake expanders. They are good for nations that struggle with expansion. They can help you take provinces in the early game. They tend to be quite limited in terms of the magic paths that they have, however, and taking new paths costs a ridiculous amount, 80 points. Oh, oops, I clicked out. So, the with Moria, you probably don't need an expander. They expand quite well on their own. Um, you've also got the Titans, who are generally have better path access than the monsters, but worse than the little dudes. But they also tend to be more capable in combat. You can thug them out. They also oftentimes have some interesting special abilities, like the Great Mother regenerates. For example, she is very, very tough on her own. She has trample as well, so you can run her into provinces and just run things over. She has the potential to be very powerful. So keeping an eye out for interesting abilities that they have can be quite useful. She starts with an extra magic site, which would, I assume, probably give you a extra air gem, possibly, maybe nature, but probably air. And yeah, so these can be some really interesting chassis. They tend to be expensive, though. You won't have as many points to work with. And they're still quite limited on path access. So last up, you've got the immobiles. These guys are generally, they cost a little bit less than these ones to get paths in, but they also don't move around. They're limited in terms of what they can equip. They have oftentimes they can't smith very well or things like that. They're kind of an interesting choice. You can, especially if you want to go for a heavy bless of some sort, where you're not necessarily relying on your fountain or your rock to do much other than bless things. They also can't move, which is a problem. So when I look at a god, I usually look at what can I do? What can I use my god to do in order to enhance what my nation already has and mitigate weaknesses that it has built into it? And so for the first example that I want to give you guys is, well, first a tip. If you want to load in a god from this screen, and you can do this when you're creating a game as well, you press Control and L, and it'll bring up the list of pretenders that you have created for that nation. So it's poorly documented, but it's a very useful key shortcut thing. And also, just in case you've made it this far and don't have and haven't seen this yet, if you press Shift and the question mark, it'll bring up all of the different hotkeys. So load a pretender, save a pretender, all that sort of stuff. Anyhow, let's load in the first. Okay, so here we are looking at the first of the gods that I wanted to show you. Now, I don't think this is an optimal build. As a matter of fact, I'm certain this is not an optimal build. Like, again, if you're playing in Lucid's tournament or something like that, this is not going to help you out. But I think this is an interesting build for a couple of reasons. One, I think it plays really well into some of the synergies that I've been talking about. And two, I think it is a very good build overall. But I also think it plays well in with Fomoria's backstory. And so almost from a role-playing perspective, this makes sense. So with that in mind, starting at the top here, let's take a look at the chassis I picked. I picked the Matrona of the Healing Spring. Now she is expensive. She is an expensive pretender chassis. You compare her to even a lot of the other Titans, like he's 220, 220. I mean, all the Titans are expensive, but like the Lord of the Forest is 190 and has very similar paths to her. So she is expensive, but one of the reasons I picked her is one for the path that she gives me, and two because if you look at her backstory here, she seems to fit very well with the Fomorians because she's this healing goddess who has this magical well that heals wounds and stuff like that. And this manifests as her having a healer trait, which cures afflictions, and having this starting site, the well of healing, that or the healing spring, that also cures afflictions. And so it sort of seems like one of those things where this is the kind of person that, if you're a race of deformed giants, you just might worship. So that's neat. But this also has a pretty practical effect for Moria because you do have troops that get afflicted, and you've also got very expensive super combatants that you want to get experienced and you want to get like that sort of stuff. And if they get afflicted, well, you send them back to hang out with the Matrona for a little while, and she cures the afflictions. And likewise, at least for troops that you recruit out of your capital, you're going to be able to heal them while they sit there waiting to get massed up and have a troop taxi take them to the front line. So all of this kind of comes together in a neat way. Um, the other nice thing about Titans that I quite like is how they can carry all of the gear slots. I mean, not all of them can. Like some of them have like weird feet, so their legs, so they can't wear shoes or um, like strange things going on with their heads. So hats are out of the question. But for the most part, they have a diverse set of gear, which means you can actually kit her out. Could use her as a super combatant herself. She would work well as that. Not as well as, well, but why use her when you have the Fomorian Kings, basically? She's pretty valuable. But the paths that she has access to, and this is sort of where the next thing comes in, is how I picked out her paths. Because if you remember how I said in the last episode, we have a lot of death, we have a lot of glamour, and we have a lot of air, right? Like big numbers in all of those, especially air. But death and glamour were no slouches either. And then we've got very limited access in water, earth, and nature. So by taking the paths here the way that I have, it actually opens up some really interesting crafting stuff. And I'm going to do a quick cut here into the Dominion's Mod Inspector just to show you how you can boost with these things by having her craft gear that you then give to your other mages. So I'll leave a link to the Mod Inspector in the description as well. It's a very, very valuable site. I would highly recommend using it. Okay, so here we are in the Mod Inspector, and I figured we'd start with the most boring of the three, and that would be water magic. So we've got our, over on the left here, I have the units that have access to that. So the Firbolg Druid can get you water, and the Fomorian King can get you water. Now, most of this is less relevant for the king because you're not going to have him sitting in a fort making stuff with water too. That's not his job. His job is to kill things. And the water ones are probably your best super combatants. So your Fomorian kings who random in water are going to be on the front lines doing the killing. You might want to give them a water bracelet when you can craft them to get them up to water 2 because it just helps with their spell casting and their buffing. But otherwise, yeah, most of this is going to apply to our Firbolg Druids because we're going to have a lot of them. So, first thing that your god's going to let you do is if you've got water 3, you can make the Robe of the Sea. That boosts your Firbolg Druids up to water 2, which then allows them to craft all sorts of stuff. You can craft the Ice Aegis. You can craft Swords of Swiftness. You can craft Boots of Quickness, Rhyme Hammers, Rhyme Halbergs, all sorts of stuff like that. Bottles of Living Water. So just run around with water elementals. They can natively do Ice Mist Scimitars as a really early weapon. but lots of cool stuff. Of course, your god can also do some crafting and get things like actually there isn't too much that's higher level. Ice pebble staff maybe. Um, yeah, probably not really something you want to worry about building too much. But yeah, so anyhow, lots of cool stuff opens up there. Not too much on the ritual side, but still nice to have. Um, Earth is where things start getting interesting. Once again, we're looking at the Firbolg Druid. There are only Earth access, and they only come with Earth 1. And the first thing they can do is your god can make them Earth Boots, which then bump these guys up to Earth 2. And one thing that that does is it opens up a whole bunch of battlefield magic for them. They become useful on the battlefield. Your Earth random Firbolgs are very valuable. Um, Treasure them. I would give them like uh, things to fend off arrows and stuff like that because they are squishy. But having that earth access on the battlefield is really useful, especially if you invest in earth boots for them, because then they can do, or at least if you invest in earth boots for them, they really need the earth boots. Um, because then they can do all sorts of earth buffs in battle, which is valuable. Um, Makes your infantry a lot more durable. You can also craft dwarven hammers, which is just in multiplayer games. If you can't craft these, you're begging people to trade them to you because they just improve your gem economy so much. Um, and likewise in single player, this is a high priority item, and unfortunately, you'd never be able to trade for it. Um, so this alone makes taking 3 Earth on a Pretender, if you have no other Earth access, it can make sense to take Earth 3 and then alchemize the 15 gems it takes to make one of these things. Um, the Iron Face I just included in here because it's a great example of something you could make for your Fomorian Kings. They gives them iron skin and gives them an incredibly good natural protection. But the other thing with the Firbolg Druids is if you give them these earth boots, all of a sudden a bunch of other cool stuff opens up for your Fomorian Kings. You can do Stars of Heroes. You can do the Boots of Grasping Earth. Smasher, like if you need to kill a monolith, that's how you do it. You give a Smasher to a Fomorian King, and you make him fly back to the rear of the enemy and hit the monolith, and it just falls apart. Marble armor is great as well. So, like if you don't want to dedicate the god turns, you can forge marble armor at level 7 instead. Um, so yeah, the earth really can increase, especially some of the durability of your Fomorian kings. And then last up, oh, and I forgot to organize this. Apologies, just a second. Yeah, so opening up nature, going to nature 4 will get you the thistle base, which is going to boost these guys up to nature 2. Now with the nature 2, that gets you all sorts of amazing stuff um, for your kings in particular. It gets you the amulet of resilience. It gets you hydra skin armor, rings of regeneration, vine shields, these boots of 7 mile strides that let you move around the map incredibly quickly, especially for your sorceresses, the ones that can't cloud trapeze, the air 1 ones. Letting them get around quickly with these boots of 7 mile strides really lets you get them where you need them, which is valuable because they're cap only and so powerful on the battlefield. um, the homunculus is fantastic for researchers. You just like stick it on the brain of one of your Firbolg druids and let it, I don't know, drink his blood or whatever it wants to do. Also lets you build the Tree Lord's staff, because if your pretender, like if in the case of the pretender example I had there with her nature 4, she could carry the thistle mace and get up to nature 5 to make a Tree Lord's staff. And that's just what your mages can do. With nature in particular, it also opens up on your pretender specifically a lot of really cool ritual spells. So you can get the Forest Troll tribe. You can get the Ivy King, who is a very, very powerful commander to summon. The You get the Troll Shaman through the Forest Troll tribe, who isn't super useful for you. Um, like you have all of those paths and better already, but I mean, forest trolls are not bad, especially if you need some siege chaff or something like that. Let them go charging in to soak arrow fire, things like that. Forest trolls can be quite useful. Um, Mother Oak is great just because, nature gems are nature gems. Gift of Health helps with healing afflictions, just even outside of, like, they don't have to hang out with the Matrona anymore, which again, your troops start with afflictions. Why would you not want to get Gift of Health up? And it further boosts HP, which for everybody, um, which, yeah, that's worth 50 gems. 10% HP boost on all of your giants and let them heal afflictions. Cool. Enchanted Forests is really helpful as well. This is kind of a dick move to do, especially in multiplayer. It'll get everybody pissed at you, but you seize control of their forests, and then all sorts of nonsense starts spawning out of them. Um, and so that one's neat. And I think well worthwhile. One that I didn't include on this pretender, but you might want to in this case, is because we only get up to death 3, which actually closes a few doors, mainly because, well, you can build let me find it here. Sorry, I didn't really pull this one up, but you can build a skull staff, right? That'll get your death 3 uh, Numidian sorceresses up to death 4. But you kind of get stuck there. And the real value in death is some of the summoning spells, like the conjuration, um, especially further up where you get Bane Lords, uh, and uh, Army of the Dead. Like there's some really very, very powerful death spells that require more than four death. But if you were to take Death 4 on your Pretender, you could get a Skull Staff, you could get a Skull Face, and then, hey, put Well of Misery up because you hate everybody else in the game. Or cast Burden of Time, and because you hate everyone else in the game. Tartarian Gate is just, if you want more super combatants, here's a super combatant for you. And if you've got the the nature magic as well, you can cast Gift of Reason to turn these guys into commanders. So going that route to open up big death is also something you might want to consider. Um, and yeah, so that's a look at those. And I'm just going to put another quick pause in here and go back to the game. Also related to crafting, and something I forgot to mention when I was talking about the Matrona's chassis here, is that with this starting site, her magic spring, it generates a nature gem every turn, which is amazing. Again, especially for Moria. And that's because, and this is something I forgot to mention in the first video, but I probably should have, all of the different nations will have different sites in their capital that let them recruit their sacreds and stuff like that. And in the case of Fomoria, they have this Isle of Balor that lets them recruit these dudes. And it gives them a water gem and 2 air gems per turn. They also have Wraith Chimbaith that does all the Numidian stuff, and it gives glamour and death. They don't have a way of getting nature gems, but by taking the Matrona, now you do. It's not like a massive nature income, but it's a start. So again, related back to the crafting, very useful. Now, moving along, the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Bless. because that sort of explain like the crafting and the spell casting and stuff like that explains why I took the magic paths I did, with a couple of exceptions, and that being the air, because this is not a path that she natively starts with. I had to pay 60 design points to get a single point of air in there. And it's not like I need to worry about boosting my air up any higher. My Fomorian Kings can get me to whatever I want. So I took this specifically for the Bless because I wanted to get precision on my dudes. Specifically, I wanted to get precision on these dudes because they only have a precision of 9. And precision 9 ain't great. They're enthusiastic when it comes to flinging their spells, but nobody is hiring them as marksmen. Adding precision into the Bless really helps mitigate that because, especially because we rely so much on evocation. Like lightning bolt is not a big deal. It has a precision bonus of 4, so they're shooting with precision 13. They're going to be hitting what they target. Thunderstrike, on the other hand, has a precision penalty of -2, which drops them down to 7. And that gets dangerous, especially because it has this massive thunder shock that will just mess up your own units just as effectively. They so getting their precision back up on the thunder strike in particular, and then also like even orb lightning and stuff like that as they continue to go down here, get chain lightning going. Having that precision boost helps a lot. And even though they, like the Fomorians can get what's it under enchantment? Yeah, they can get the Thunder Ward and stuff like that. You definitely don't want lesser, but yeah, regular old Thunder Ward. It's got a good area of effect. It gives shock resistance. It excuse me, it'll help, but it's not going to carry you. And like realistically, you may want to ditch one of these reinvigorations and add more precision. Next up in the Bless, I have the Reinvigoration, and that's there mostly to help out my druids. Again, this is a Mage Bless. This is going to keep them in the fight longer, and this is going to let them just get more spells out before they get sleepy and need to have a little lie down. It also really helps the kings. Like if when I get to the point that I start thugging out the kings, reinvigoration, they love that. It's one of the other reasons that taking the nature is so valuable is it lets me make those reinvigoration items, the amulet of reinvigoration and stuff like that. So any reinvigoration you can get on to mages is unbelievably helpful. And then heroism is just an exceptionally powerful bless generally. Like this is going to double the amount of experience that my mages get, which is going to increase all of the things. Basically, it boosts attack skill, it boosts defense skill, it boosts just a bunch of different stuff anytime they go up a level. So getting them up levels faster is great. And you'll be able to really make use of that again with synergizing back with the healing spring and the matrona, where if you've got an experienced druid even, or never mind a king, you cloud trapeze them back to hang out with her and get their afflictions removed, and it lets you continue leveraging the heroism. So you get a Fomorian king who ends up mute. Well, there's a there's an app for that. Um, Anyhow, that's basically the bless. Other things that you might want to consider would be, out of what I have, not much. Possibly getting rid of some of the reinvigoration, adding more precision in. Again, just the druids kind of need it. Depending on if you have particular enemies, like if you've got Vanheim, it might make sense to actually try to get 2 air, pick up shock resistance. If you've got Niflheim, hey, cold resistance would be the worst thing in the world. Um, just some of that sort of stuff to kind of help out. The survival's probably not really worthwhile, but Low light, maybe, if you know you're up against Agartha and you're going to have to do a bunch of fighting in caves. I think some of your sacreds already have low light. No, they don't. These guys might, though. Yeah, they've got dark vision. But yeah, if you want to use the unmarked underground, team them up with the Numidians, who also have dark vision, that's not the worst idea. If, like I said, you've got a Garth on the board or something, but that's one of the nice things about blesses is you can sort of tweak them as need be. And oftentimes, especially playing multiplayer, you might want to, if there's somebody that you know will just be able to mess up one of your core things, well, try to solve it with a bless if you can. For Dominion, I only took Dominion 4, not a big focus on sacreds with her. Mostly going to be focusing on the warriors, and my capital's just going to be churning out Numidians. The scales I picked kind of a bit for a long game. One of the nice things about her is she does get bonus growth, so I went up to growth 3. Don't necessarily need to. I value luck quite a bit in general. I think you actually look at the numbers, you get a lot of gems, you get a lot of gold, you get a lot of stuff like that from having luck. Production and order are mostly just there so that I can continue to churn out units. I am playing this with a fairly heavy focus on my warriors and my Furbolg. They're going to be the bulk of my armies, at least through to the mid game. I haven't gotten into any late game in Dominion 6 yet, really, so I don't know how they'll hold up there. But they're going to be my primary line holders, so being able to get them out faster is good and in larger quantities. I took neutral on the heat cold. You could go heat 1, you could go cold 1 if you wanted. It's not that big of a hit, and then bump up production or something like that. I did take drain. And a lot of that is because I have the very efficient researchers in the form of the Furbolg. They can afford to lose a point of research, especially if they've got an owl quill. So you could entirely justify going like that instead. But I don't think that the drain really hurts for Moria all that much. I did take her imprisoned, so she's not going to show up for quite a while, which does kind of delay super combatanting. But on the other hand, in order to do that effectively anyhow, like in order to turn your Fomorian kings into something effective, you need quite a bit of research done. Like you need to have construction, probably up to construction 5. You need to have, because you want to be able to you want to get greater magic items. You want these for super combatants. This is where you find like your amulet of resilience, the one that gives you reinvigoration. This is where you find your rings of regeneration. You find your swords of swiftness and your frost brands and all those sorts of goodies that just work very, very well on your kings. Also gets you the silver halberd that some of your guys can cast or use, and yeah, other cool stuff like that. So keeping that in mind, you also are probably going to want a fair amount of alteration. You're probably going to want to get up at least to, well, let's just get out of just air here because we got other stuff too. You're going to want to have things like Stygian Skin, so that's alt 4 for your water randoms. You're going to want, what else? Quickness at level 4 is very valuable, again, for the water randoms. And where are some of the others? Anyhow, there's lots of stuff in alteration that you'd want. There's things in enchantment that you would want. So having her wake up late ain't the end of the world. I've babbled about that enough. So let's look at a couple of the other gods. And that's sort of the Mage Bless. I guess if I wanted to show you quickly what a much more sort of optimally designed Mage Bless might look like, it would probably be this dude, where now I've got a bigger bless. I've added Farcaster into it. I still have the path access that I wanted. I also now have access to Astral, and this guy gets very powerful, if for no other reason than because he's dormant. And now in his case, like, you lose the spring and all that sort of stuff, but he does also boost the research of everybody in the same province as him. He is an incredibly good researcher himself. Now, a big weakness with him is the fact that he's got Astral, and there's no other Astral on Moria. And so if you were to take this guy into a highly competitive multiplayer game, and there's other Astral nations, they'll just kill him. And anytime he kind of comes back, they kill him again. And they keep doing that. In this case, he also has better scales, though. So you could put this kind of wherever, right? Actually, no, I guess he doesn't have better scales. But he is dormant, so he wakes up sooner. But you could drop that down, put that, do whatever, right? Like, scales are scales. Do what you want with them. And again, a lot of it comes down to experimenting, finding out what mix of units that you're using and what resource do they pull from the most, and then how long is the game going to go on for, and things like that. So to look at a more optimized Mage Bless, somebody like him would be interesting. If you wanted a budget version of the Matrona, again, this is just a more efficient version of her. He's got a bit more in the domain department. Oh no, sorry, that's a different. Actually, I think those were the only two sort of Mage Blesses that I have. Let's look at some of the other interesting ones, though. We've got we'll start with her. So she's a variation of the other one, but this one's focused on a troop bless because I took larger. And larger's an interesting one. It shows another interesting synergy with the Fomorians, because if you remember how the unmarked and the Numidians can share a square, or the Fomorians can share a square with the Furbolg and the Numidians. Because they're size 6, getting bumped up to size 7 doesn't change that. So all the larger bless really amounts to is a 30% boost in hit points, which bump these guys up to 45 or something like that, and these guys up even more, 80 or more than that. It makes them bigger, makes them better at repelling. So if they're getting charged, they're more likely to be able to, like, stab people away, and even bumps up their strength. They lose some defense skill, but okay, yeah, there's always trade-offs. But the big penalty of the larger blast that you normally see is, like, if you've got a human-sized sacred, they go from size 3 to 4. Well, you can only fit 2 in a square now, and that kind of sucks. You go from 7 to 8, well, now you can't fit a smaller dude in the square with you. So 6 to 7 is kind of an ideal size. Going 5 to 6, you can't fit 2 in a square. Anyhow, sorry. But like 4 to 5 isn't bad, and 6 to 7 isn't bad for a larger bless, because it doesn't actually affect the density of your squares. So that's an interesting synergy there. And especially in a single player game, especially on a lower difficulty, I think this might be kind of fun if you wanted to focus on your giants quite a bit and actually play the sacred game a little bit. So again, probably not optimal for multiplayer. I just genuinely feel there's better things you can do with your bless. But that does lead into something that I wanted to bring up, because this actually came up on Reddit when I posted this on there, and that was the idea of a Regeneration Bless. And here's the problem I see with that. This is about the most efficient way that I could put together a Regeneration Bless. Because this is going all in on the sacreds. You want to have a very high dominion, because you have these very powerful sacreds that you want to put out. like, or you're investing this big bless in your sacreds. And this would be built around the Fomorian giant. So the other thing to keep in mind there too is there, at absolute most, you're going to be getting 5 of these per turn. If your Dominion is at 10. Now his Dominion's at 9, but that's because if you build extra temples, you can go up to Dominion 10. You build 4 more temples, it'll get you to Dominion 10. Now, the argument that was kind of put forward is it makes the giants very, very good at holding a line, and I'm not going to deny that that is true. These guys regenerating at 7 hit points a turn are going to be able to tank a lot of damage. Now, the problem is, and he was saying, so that means they're going to be very effective at protecting your mages while your mages do their work, which is kind of what I rely on the Furbolg and the Fomorian warriors, or at least with the more Mage Blast, you rely on the Furbolg, the Fomorian warriors to hold that line and kind of numbers over quality. Okay? Now, first problem that runs into is numbers versus quality. Battlefields in 6 are big, and so it's great to have a very durable unit, but if the enemy's able to flank around you, either by outnumbering you, which they would if you were relying on these guys, or by, well, I mean, just putting a fast unit on a flank and having it ordered to attack rear, they're not going to be able to respond to that. So it's going to get back into your mages anyhow. And that's something you really don't want. Now, you also run into all the other problems that I kind of talked about with giants, where they splatter one unit at a time. They don't have the greatest of attack skill. I mean, sure, they get experience, it's gonna get better, but they still don't have the greatest of attack skill. And the I I genuinely feel like this is a trap. If you want to try it, go for it. You will have some very durable giants. I just don't see it lasting very long. Um, Especially because you have other ways of getting regeneration. If you're boosting up your other stuff, like making the boosters and stuff like that, you can cast regeneration on the battlefield. So yeah, that's him. Um, Looking at a couple of the other kind of fun ones that I came up with. This one was a bit of a meme. This would be great fun if I were playing a blitz or something like that, and I just wanted to mess with my opponents, like sort of a beer and pretzels type game. Again, this is a sacred focused build, but it's focused on the unmarked. But the idea is they become stealthy. Um, they become stealthy. Heck, the Fomorian giants become stealthy if you want to raid with them. Your Fomorian kings are stealthy. And so you team these guys up with the Numidian warriors and you just charge around and you raid with giants, which I think would be absolutely hilarious. So there's this silly bless, but and again, kept scales relatively neutral here. Adjust to taste, but that's a neat one. If you wanted a wake expander, you could do worse than the thrice horned boar. He still gets you the nature and the earth access, which is pretty cool. You lose the water, which kind of sucks, but still, now you've got this awake guy. You've still got good scales. You've got a reinvigoration bless to help out your mages, and he can stomp around and take provinces for you for the first 12 turns and let you expand more effectively. So if you do struggle with expansion, if you aren't confident with expansion, this guy's 100% an option. I'd say especially in like a new player game or something like that, where getting big early can be really helpful, and like then just be super big and scary and have nobody want to mess with you. That's something you could leverage here. So I think he'd be something to consider in a case like that. Um, and I think that's really about it. The Imprisoned Greedy's kind of boring. She was an attempt to kind of get everything that didn't really work out. I don't particularly care for her. And other than that, I guess go back to Dormant Forest here. He's basically a budget version of the Matrona with the larger bless, where he's just got these scales. Um, Realistically, if you're doing this, maybe just go for the pig. He's dormant. He can get a few sacreds out, but not that many. I guess you could go like that. No, can't even do that. You get up to 7 easily enough without starting to tank scales. But yeah, so he'd be something to consider if you wanted a budget version and you wanted him to wake up sooner. But anyhow, that is it. So hopefully this was helpful. If you have questions, if you have comments, please ask away down in the description or in the comment section. And yeah, until next time, cheers.